Hi. Welcome to Training Performance, Training the Mind. My name is Courtney Allison Mills, and I am going to facilitate this today. I'm really excited to talk about this. So, before we get into anything, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background. I'm not a gymnast, I never have been. I think maybe my mom took me to one gymnastics class when I was little, and that was it. I can do a cartwheel, I can do a one handed cartwheel, but that's the extent. I'm actually a dancer. So my position is I work in Arlington ISD in Arlington, Texas, and I am the modern contemporary dance teacher for the Center for Visual and Performing Arts. So my background is very much in movement, movement-based training, somatics, and I got my undergrad at Texas Women's University, and I got my master's from National University. My undergrad was in dance. My master's is in performance psychology, hence the title of this. I apologize for my dog in the background. All right. So we're going to just jump right in. I'm very, very excited about this. I got to do this in St. Louis, and it was phenomenal being able to just talk about this. And let's see, share screen. Okay. Okay. So here we go. Hopefully you can see that. This is training performance, training the mind. So what is performance? I think that most of us, especially when I went into my master's degree in performance psychology, I went into the mindset of thinking it was like, is it theater performance? Is it athletic performance? And as it turns out, it's everything. So everything we do on a day-to-day basis is performance, which is crazy to think about. It's so broad. Everything from firefighters to police officers to occupational performance, how you perform your job. All of those things are considered performance. And so sometimes we recognize that some performances are bad. Let's say if a salesperson has a rough quarter, their sales performance numbers reflect that. And so was a bad performance. But by definition, performance is a verb. It's one, an action meaning to adhere to the terms of, two, to carry out or do, and three, to carry out an action or pattern of behavior. And for me, I'd really like to focus on the third one, is carrying out an action or behavior, because that's essentially what we're training our athletes to do. So how do you connect performance to training? I think that that's a big ask, especially when you're working with younger students and you're working with students who maybe aren't developed fully in terms of an emotional, a physical, a mental, and a spiritual maturity. So you're training them to do something that they've never done before, and that they have very limited resources in terms of really understanding what that means. So there's this old saying that I know in the dance world we say a lot, and it's practice how you perform. You have to practice how you perform. And I don't like that. And it's not that I don't think it's relevant, but it suggests that practicing and performing are two different entities. And while in theory, I think that we can say, well, practice is something we do in a different space and performance is something we do when there's people around. I think that looking at it that way sometimes skews the athlete's ability to really recognize what their goals are. So asking someone to perform how you practice means that you're going into a high stress event and you're asking the performer, the athlete, to not do anything different than they've done in performance, right? So thinking back, I think on my performance career as a dancer, all the way up until my early 20s, it was very much, I would go to practice and I would go through the motions. And then, once you put your costume on, we call it our Superman suit, you put on your Superman suit and all of a sudden you're ready to perform. But what that does is that it creates a mental idea that you're going to do something completely different than what you've been practicing for a certain amount of time. So when we ask our athletes to go into a situation and we say, perform how you practice, they recognize they're not going to do anything different than what they do in practice. They're going to be able to process the emotions and all of the adrenaline that's going through their body because they're going to be able to put themselves in that space in a practice. That is what we're going to get to, is really understanding how to achieve that. And I think that this is probably a little more, definitely from when I did this in St. Louis, this lecture, I got a lot of people that were like, wow, I never thought about how mental that was. And so this is very much a mentality that translates over to a physicality. So as we're performing how we practice, you have to constantly remind the athlete, you know, in a practice, is this how you want to show up on that day? Is this how you think you're going to feel on that day when you have your performance? So putting the pressure on them and having them recreate that that stress and that adrenaline in order to completely and totally fulfill whatever that grandiose performance is having them be able to do that at any given time. And I think that for me kind of sounds a bit like acting. You know, there are different actors that are able to completely put themselves in a mindset where they can cry on demand, right? I cannot do that. But they can also become somebody completely different. But I think in those senses, they're practicing that not in the moment, but beforehand. So they're able to bring that up so quickly that the performance part becomes very, very easy for them. And I'm not saying that this is like for me, gymnastics looks like the hardest thing I've ever seen in my life. So I recognize the difference. Okay. So this exercise is really for you. Connecting through performance experiences. Think back to your favorite performance memory. And I think this is a minute when we can just kind of take back and just think about our own performance experience. And that can be anything. If you happen to perform, I don't know, at a gymnastics meet when you were 10 or 12 or 15 or 18, go back to your favorite memory. I can take you through mine. My favorite memory was in 1999, and I know that's dating myself, but in 1999, I had a performance and I knew it was going to be one of my last as that caliber of performance before I moved into the education side. And I can distinctly remember things happening in slow motion because I was enjoying them so much. And I was really like present as I was performing. So that presence and that engagement in the moment slowed everything down. And I've heard football players talk about that as well, where when you get to a certain point, the game slows down for you and your awareness is heightened and you're able to kind of see different things that you maybe didn't see before. This was the case in this particular performance, and how funny it was my last. And I kind of want to scream because it's like, oh my gosh, like, why didn't I do this my entire career? So what that became is this attention to the absolute most present moment. I wasn't thinking about what I just did. I wasn't thinking about what I was about to do. I was doing exactly what I would have done in practice. And therefore, everything aligned. And that presence, the engagement, and the confidence that I had been practicing in that performance realm for so long just clicked. And it slowed down and I could see everything. And it was the coolest experience because there was no fear. I knew what was going to happen because I had rehearsed it so many times in the frame of mind of being present and engaged that it just happened. And I feel lucky. I feel lucky that that has happened to me, but I want you to take through like what that is for you. So it may have been any event that you've ever been a part of, but in those moments, what did you feel physically? What happened? What happened emotionally? Think about what happened before you walked onto your apparatus or before you even walked into the gym. What was that feeling in your chest, in your stomach, in your brain, in your eyes? Your sensory, everything starts to kind of go a little bit like way big, right? So think about those things. What are they for you? Because the more you understand what those are for you, the more you're going to be able to share that and teach that to your athletes. All right. So this seems really ridiculous, right? Storytelling and energy. The hippie lady on the other side of this camera is telling me to be a storyteller. Yes, I am asking you to be a storyteller. Most of our athletes don't have the experience or the knowledge that we hold, so they have no idea what it feels like to actually be in a performance until they're in one. And we can train and we can try to understand, and we can try to get them to understand it, but until they've been in that environment, there's no way to prepare them. So, how do you create that environment before you walk into that competition or that performance? You really have to start working with them in a sense of telling them what you felt. And so I really liked writing this out. When working with dance students who are brand new, I always tell them stories about what it's like to step on stage for the first time. I can vividly remember when I was a sophomore in high school, a freshman dancer was walking onto the stage and completely forgot everything she was doing. Like, just stood there and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I was behind her walking on stage saying, okay, take a deep breath. What is the first thing we do? And just walking her through it before the curtain opened. And so those kinds of things help the performers recognize that there are all kinds of different ideas of what those situations and scenarios can be. And you can see as I'm talking about these performance moments, what my face is doing, what the energy comes from my body. I'm not speaking to you in a performance sense like this, where the performance had zero energy and it really made me feel, no, when you talk about your experiences, it brings you back to that space and time. And it fills your body with that nostalgia all over again. And everyone can see it and everyone can feel it. More importantly, your athletes are able to connect to you through that storytelling and that experience. I think oftentimes we don't give the energy of how we're saying something or the thing that we're feeling um, as much. As much duty as we should. Having a certain energy that you feel within your body is only going to help you portray whatever you're trying to get across to your athletes, especially if they're younger. The more you can create a less stagnant environment with emotional responsibility. I feel like they're more drawn to obviously like animated like cartoons, all those things that keep their effort and energy alive. So the more you can harness that within your storytelling, the better. However, when you're telling a story, be aware of how you're sharing the story. Oftentimes we get into the space of sharing a story in terms of me and I and this grandiose thing. And yes, the story is about you, but there's a lesson coming from the story. So as you're telling your story, as you're sharing with your athletes what all of this is, you're attempting to give them a reference point for them to begin to develop their own process and their own philosophy. I think most of us have had several coaches in our lifetime, which is phenomenal. And I think that everybody should have several, but I think that we take from different coaches. I had a movement teacher that taught specifically modern that I mirror most of my pedagogy after because I really resonated with his ability to connect in an emotional sense. I have another teacher that had more of a disciplined style. And while I didn't agree with his methods all of the time, there is something that I took from that in order to put it into my own pedagogy. So just be aware of your ability to give little nuggets to your students because they're going to be able to take those and make them their own, which is what we want. All right, training individual performance. A healthy environment for a blossoming performer. Recognize that you are coaching more than gymnastics. I can't tell you how many times the beginning of my career as an educator in my 20s that I pushed and pushed and pushed the technique and I pushed and pushed all of the things that really weren't helping them formulate who they were. And only in my latter years do I discover that the kids that I'm training 99% of them are not going to go on to be professional dancers. They're not going to go on to be dance educators. They're going to go on and do other things with their lives. And so while I'm really, really concentrating on teaching them in that moment about this particular idea and this particular technique, I have to remember that I'm building a person. I'm not just teaching gymnastics, or I'm not just teaching dance. I'm creating this human. And so, some ways that you can encourage your athletes to become more engaged with you is to dialogue with them, to talk with them, even little kids, like actually have a conversation with them, ask them what their thoughts are, ask them how they feel, encourage open and honest conversation about their thoughts, their feelings, and their experiences. If they've never performed before, ask them what they imagine it to be like. And then maybe have all of their teammates watch them do something and have them react, and then talk about what that felt like. Does this sound kind of like a therapy session? Yes, like it very much is asking and receiving information in order to gain a better sense of self. Um, More importantly, listen to them. Like, don't, I think that we all have that, like when we get overwhelmed or we're in a situation, there's a lot of things happening where somebody will say something to us and we really don't listen. We're just like, yeah, 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 I totally got it. Thank you. That was great. And we're not connecting. That's not making them feel heard or valued. And so when you actually like look at a athlete and you listen to them and they see and feel you listening, it creates a sense of importance for them that's really, really important in the training aspect, because we're ultimately building confidence. We're building confidence in their own thoughts and their own process. Engage with more questions. If they say, I'm really nervous and scared when I perform, ask them why. And I think that when they answer, they're going to say, well, I don't know. Well, what does it feel like when you perform? Continue to ask questions until they continue to talk it out. And then you can get down to kind of the nitty gritty of what they're not understanding or what they're not getting from you as a coach. And I think that's a really hard thing to say too, because we want to be the all knowing and all, like, I want to be the person you can come to for everything. And the minute I realize that I can't do that, that I have to allow them to develop their own thoughts and ideas about what they love, what they don't love. Um, it speaks volumes as for you as a coach to allow them to do those things. So you're building a whole person. You're not just building this little gymnast. And absolutely, you want that for all of them. But at the same time, it's really honestly not going to happen for everyone. So you want to really focus on building that ownership of self. What does it mean to take ownership of your experience? When an athlete walks into the gym, what's the first thing they do? How can they take ownership of that? Are they putting their shoes away? Do you have to ask them to do that? Like building little tiny habits into making sure that they get what they need when they walk in, even though if they don't know that they need it yet, is super important. Recognize that as you take ownership of your experience, that ownership is going to like immediately translate into the results and the consequences that they face. Consequence isn't always bad. A consequence can be a positive as well. And if they go into a meet and they don't place as highly as they would have liked, it's really okay. Let's go back to your process. Let's go back to your procedure as an athlete, and let's see how you're owning that. You have to own the consequence and you have to own the result just as much as you own the experience and the performance. Communication. I feel like this is a huge one for a lot of us. Sometimes we see athletes kind of go off and like detract a little bit from the situation in order to kind of self-soothe. Be really, really aware of just asking if they're okay. Are you okay? How are you feeling? And recognizing that each individual is different. So communicate with them constantly. Recognize for feedback. This was a really hard one for me to understand as a younger person. And it took me a really long time to teach as an older person. When you give feedback, it's not negative. And I think that rather than giving like that really stern correction, think about how you can turn that into feedback and how you deliver that feedback, and making sure your athletes know that the feedback is not coming from a place of negativity, that the feedback is always meant for the positive. It's meant for them to own whatever that correction or result was, and for them to go back into their own toolkit and say, okay, she just told me that I was late to the handspring, or for me, it would be maybe my feet aren't pointed, or I'm late to a certain count. Um, and I think a lot of times it's not just tone, it's that they've been taught when somebody gives them feedback, it's a negative. And so continue to stress that it is not a negative to receive feedback. You are only looking out for their best interest, and you want them to be better at what they do and feel more confident. Community. You are creating a community, especially those of you that like really focus on teams in your gym. You're creating a culture. And when you build a culture, you have to develop all of these individuals within that culture. Because as we continue to understand that idea of community and push it onto our students, that sounds awful, but you're teaching them how to be a part of society. You're teaching them how to work with others. You're teaching them how to persevere. You're teaching them how to be a good teammate off and on the floor. So recognize that when you're building that whole person, you're absolutely building that community of people as well. Encouragement of discovery. You are not training a person who is fully developed mentally or physically. Each athlete will process and develop a response to stress differently. Recognize the individual's response and work backwards. How can you encourage your athlete to discover their own way of responding to stress and not your way of responding to stress? I think with the Olympics happening, just so soon, like just a little bit ago in our past, I was having a really great time watching the preparation of individual athletes in individual events. So for instance, swimming, you're looking at these humans line up and get ready to perform their event. And every single person has a different way of getting into that focused state. Some of them like to slap their thighs. Some of them like to remain quiet and still. Some of them like to splash water on their face. There are so many different ways that we approach how we handle stress and adrenaline. And all of those ways are unique to the individual. I used to dance with a girl named Carrie. And Carrie, every single practice, every single rehearsal, was super quiet. She was very, very shy. She didn't speak a whole lot. She was very talented. And I guess she just didn't feel the need to be just super loud, but she was very consistent and very solid as a performer. When it came to show days, when it came time for performances, Carrie would not shut up. She couldn't stop talking. She was continually just like for 45 minutes, she wouldn't shut up. And so it just seems really, really interesting to me that dichotomy in how we view ourselves can completely change when we get into that stressed environment. And performance is a stressful environment. So recognize that all of your athletes are going to handle that differently. And when they do handle that differently, encourage them to explore a little bit more about what makes them like that and why they feel when they do that, they're self-soothing and getting themselves ready. So again, asking questions, being engaged, and continuing to train the individual. Okay, this is a big one. And we use this definitely in the dance education world, is identifying goals. And so I like to go through 3 different goals. I like to go through the daily goal, the short-term goal, and the long-term goal. For younger dancers or athletes, I always start with a short-term and a daily. I rarely go to long-term until I have them for quite a few years. Mainly because if you ask a 10-year-old what their long-term goal is, and they've been doing this for 2 years, they're going to say, I want to go into the Olympics. And you know that that's not a possibility. So continue to work them on those daily and short-term goals. For me, daily goals are like, I want to be able to do this technique or this move 5 times without moving my feet or landing it perfectly. Or even if it's 1 time, I want to land a flip 1 time. That's my goal for the day. And you're taking these very small chunks and you're building those into short goals. So my daily goal might be to land a back handspring. Okay. My short-term goal might be to land that back handspring at the end of a tumbling pass. So building up to that short-term goal definitely helps you see that daily goal when you come in each day. When you get with athletes that you've been working with for a long time, that's when we start getting into those long-term goals. Okay, do you want to be a collegiate athlete? Where do you think gymnastics can take you? Where do you want it to take you? I think really understanding what those long-term goals are, really, really important. Sometimes as coaches, we can get our feelings hurt when our athletes and performers don't have the same long-term goals as we do for them. Oftentimes I have a dancer that's just absolutely beautiful and has beautiful technique, but has zero interest in continuing dance after high school and college. That's okay. We have to respect that. And we have to recognize that they have their own personal goals. All we can do is bring them to the space that they want to achieve. Conclusion. Training an athlete properly is building authentic confidence. Most of us have learned to be confident through mistakes, and this is huge. Oftentimes, if your performer, your athlete, is scared to make a mistake, they won't give you 100% because they're holding back just a little bit of effort. And if our performers are holding back a little bit of effort, then we're not getting their full 100. Encourage the mistake through confidence. Most of us have learned an absolute truth, which is we're only going to learn something if something fails. So a lot of us learn through the things that don't work out. I don't ever remember learning something when my team won a world championship. I was really happy and I was really excited, but I didn't really learn from that moment, except for maybe that hard work really pays off. But that hard work requires us to allow for mistakes and require for our athletes to understand what it takes to get back up, dust themselves off, and try it again with 100% confidence. And that means you have to kind of step back and allow them to make the mistake. And it's so crazy to say that because so much of our activities are based on precision and making sure that we get and we stick everything. We don't allow the performers to learn for themselves, it's not going to work. It's like having that friend that has a relationship that you just know is awful, and you keep telling them and telling them and telling them, like, this person's really bad for you. And they're like, no, but they're this, this, and this. That lesson only is learned when that relationship ends and they completely see it for themselves. So recognize that giving them the opportunity to make mistakes and encouraging that is going to be so much more beneficial to them and their mental health in the long run in terms of performance and confidence than any other yelling or telling them to be perfect on something is going to. So recognize that when they make a mistake, ask them, were you 100% during that mistake? If they say yes, encourage it. If they say no, ask them why. Are they scared of you? Are they scared of the move? Once that little bit of fear creeps in, as we've recently seen, it becomes a whole different ball game. And so we have to be listening to our athletes. We have to be making sure that we're giving them all that we can give them, all the tools that we can give them so they can be self-sufficient. Recognize that your athletes are going to mimic almost everything you do. And in that sense of mimicking, they're going to pick up on things like your energy. They're going to pick up on things like your tone. Most of the time, our younger athletes are looking for shapes. Whenever you create a shape in their body, that's how they're going to try to learn whatever you're asking them to do. You're looking for an action, but they're looking at a shape. So recognize movement is a massive part of this confidence within performance, because you're asking them to move their body in potentially a way that they don't see it visually. So having to really work with our athletes in determining how they operate is the most important thing we can do as teachers, as coaches, is the most important thing we can do in terms of providing them the best experience. All right. Um, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I think when I'm interested in performance, specifically physicality wise, because there's such a somatic connection, the connection between body and brain, and how we approach just that within ourselves is such a testament to whatever athletic or artistic venture we try to take. But then trying to teach that to a younger person, is really interesting and really difficult, because we're oftentimes asking bigger questions, not just about us, but about like life in general. And we're asking our athletes and our performers to put themselves out there on a daily basis for all kinds of criticism, for all kinds of little commentaries, and especially judgment. And so often, um, when we go up into our teenagers and our preteens, they're so nervous about judgment, not just from an adjudication panel, but they're nervous about judgment from their peers. They're nervous about judgment from you. And they want so badly for you to be proud of them. When in turn, we need to start teaching them that being proud of themselves and honoring themselves in that way is the absolute best way we can give them any sort of education or coach them in any sort of athletic venture, ever. Like, we're helping them become the person that we know they can be, but we're also teaching them these skills and gymnastics that can potentially help them along in their way in life. Um, that's what I have for you today. I hope that you got a little something out of this. You can find me if you need me on Facebook, or you can send me an email if you have questions. I'm available for lectures. I'm available for personal coaching opportunities for teachers and students. I do a lot of work in the Texas area. I'm in Fort Worth. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This is my passion, and I'm so honored to be able to share this with you today. Have an amazing day and an amazing Congress, and I'll be back later.